Welcome friends to my video on the chronic gastritis with the H. pylori. Before going into the topic proper, I just want to brief about what is a normal histology. So we have a gastric glands which have the foveolar cells on the surface. They will be producing the mucus. Then we have the parietal cells which will be producing the acid and the intrinsic factor. We have the enterochromaffin cells which will be producing the gastrin and the histamine, and we have the chief cells which will be producing the pepsinogen. Now these cells will be present in the stomach, but the concentration of these cells will be different in the different parts of the stomach. So the parts of the stomach, we have cardia, fundus, body and the intrum. So in different parts we have the different concentrations. In the cardia and the intrum we have increased concentration of the foveolar cells, that's the mucus secreting cells. And in the intrum we have more of the G cells which will be producing the gastrin. Here in this we have less number of the parietal cells and the oxyntic cells, whereas in the corpus we have more of the parietal cells and the chief cells. So parietal cells will be producing the acid, chief cells will be producing the pepsinogen. They are more in the body. But in the intrum we have more of the G cells which will be producing the gastrin. Now coming to the normal protective mechanism what we have in the stomach, because in the stomach we have a pH which is close to 1. It's a highly acidic medium, so we have close to 1. Actually this is useful for the digestion of the food. But at this pH there can be damage to the mucosa also. So the stomach has its own protective mechanism. It has a mucin, a layer of the mucin which is produced by the foveolar cells, and there is a bicarbonate ion in the mucin which will be neutralizing the acid. Then we have the epithelial cells which form the physical barrier, and we have the epithelial cell regeneration also. It will be for every 3 to 7 days. That's because the cells get damaged, then the function of the cells will not be proper. So if they are new or the fresh cells, the protection of the bicarbonate and the mucin, which is the function of the epithelial cells, that will be present. And then we have a rich vascularity. We'll see in the diagrammatic representation better. So this is the luminal surface where you have increased concentration of the acid. So then you have below that you have a mucin layer. Now this mucin is produced by the epithelial cells. So this mucin forms a layer on the epithelial cell so that the acid doesn't come in direct contact with the epithelial cells. Now this bicarbonate is also produced by the epithelial cells, so it's released into the lumen, and also it is released by the back diffusion into the blood vessels. So these epithelial cells along with the bicarbonate, they also produced a lipid. So for a lipid which forms a layer on the epithelial cells protecting the cells from the direct action of the acid. So this forms a pre-epithelial mucosal defense. You have a mucin with the bicarbonate and a lipid layer which forms a coating on the epithelial cells. Then you have an epithelial layer which forms a physical barrier, because these epithelia have very tight junctions. So because of these tight junctions, it prevents the back diffusion of the acid into the lamina propria. So this forms a physical barrier. Then you have a subepithelial mechanism which has a rich vascularity. So because of the rich vascularity, there will be a supply of the micronutrients and the oxygen. Along with that, the bicarbonate which is produced by the cells, it will also be present in the blood vessel. So if at all there is a back diffusion of the acid, that will be neutralized by the bicarbonate which is present in the rich vascularity in the blood, which is present in the blood. So these are the mucosal defenses. We have a pre-epithelial which has a mucin, bicarbonate and a lipid layer. Epithelial which forms a tight junction, so it forms a physical barrier. Then you have a subepithelial which has a rich vascularity. Now coming to the topic proper, that is a chronic gastritis. So the definition goes like, itis means it's an inflammation. So we have a chronic mucosal inflammation of the stomach which leads to the mucosal atrophy, and later on there can be an intestinal metaplasia. So if this intestinal metaplasia occurs later, this can lead to dysplasia, and further it leads to the adenocarcinoma. Now what are the causes of the chronic gastritis? The commonest cause is infection with the H. pylori. Then the second common cause is autoimmune gastritis, and other less common causes what we see in the chronic gastritis are the radiation injury, chronic bile reflux, you can have a direct mechanical injury, means direct injury to the epithelial cells when they are doing the nasogastric intubation, or in the systemic diseases like the Crohn's disease, amyloidosis, or the graft versus host disease. So all these things can cause damage. They can actually produce and damage to the defense mechanism. And among all this, the most commonest is the H. pylori. So what is this H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori? It is actually a gram-negative non-sporing spiral or a curvilinear bacilli, now, which is measuring about 3.5 into 0.5 micrometers. It has 2 to 5 flagellae at one pole, and this has a genome which will be encoding for 1500 proteins. Now this one, how it causes the damage is by two methods. It directly adheres to the epithelial cells and cause damage, or it stimulates the epithelial cells to produce the cytokines that will be producing the inflammatory reactions, and that will damage the mucosa. So it damages in two ways. Either it directly damages or it stimulates the epithelial cells to produce inflammation. Now, how is it transmitted? So the mode of transmission is fecal-oral route. That's why this is more common in the areas where there is a poor hygienic conditions, where we have overcrowding, poverty, limited education. And usually the infection occurs in the childhood, but all the persons who have H. pylori, they don't develop the chronic gastritis. Why this occurs is, I'll show you, because there are certain differences in the host factors. So because of that, though the patient has H. pylori, he may not develop the chronic gastritis. All the people will not develop the chronic gastritis. So for the virulence of the H. pylori, how does H. pylori survives in the gastric acidic medium, and how it causes the damage? For that, for its survival, it has certain factors in it. So it has a flagella, it produces the urease, then it has certain adhesins also, with the help of which it adheres to the cells, and then it expresses certain bacterial toxins, that is cytotoxin associated gene A protein and vacuolating cytotoxin gene A protein. So these two will be causing damage to the cell. Now how they cause the damage? So this is the H. pylori. So as I told you, it has 2 to 5 flagellae, and these flagellae are useful for the mobility of H. pylori in the viscous mucus. Then it has a urease enzyme. So this urease, and with the help of this urease enzyme, it converts the endogenous urea to ammonia and the bicarbonate. So this ammonia and the bicarbonate, it actually neutralizes the acid. So it has a neutral pH surrounding it, because it will be producing the urease, and that urease will be producing ammonia and the bicarbonate, so that in the surrounding vicinity the acid will be neutralized and it survives. Then it has certain adhesin molecules. So for these adhesin molecules, the cell will have certain receptors. So these adhesins come and attach to the receptors, and they are useful to adhere to the host cells. So there is a difference in the different hosts in the expression of these receptors. That's why, as I told you, the virulence, the infectivity of the H. pylori is not same in all the people. The people who have more expression of these receptors for the adhesins, they have more damage, and the people who have less receptors, the damage will be less. So all the patient did not have the same amount of the damage with the H. pylori. Then coming to the toxins, we have cytotoxin associated gene A protein and vacuolating cytotoxin gene A protein. So cytotoxin associated gene A protein, what does it do is, it alters the signaling pathways. That means it causes the transcription of certain genes which are responsible for the cytokine protections, and then it stimulates the cellular proliferation, and it also produces certain cytoskeletal rearrangement, so that the junctions which are tight will be loosened. So because of the cytokine protection, there will be an inflammatory reaction. Because of cellular proliferation, in the later stages it can go into the malignancies. Then because of the vacuolating cytotoxin gene A protein, what does it do is, it produces voltage dependent channels, because through these channels bicarbonate and certain anions are supplied to the HP, which acts as nutrients to the H. pylori. So along with that, this vacuolization, it damages the cell. So slowly the cell will undergo the lysis. Similarly, it also inhibits the T lymphocytes. So inflammatory response against the H. pylori is prevented. So this is one mechanism. And then it also produces certain enzymes like mucinase, protease, and the lipases. They cause damage directly to the cell membrane. Then you have a lipopolysaccharides which are present in the bacterial cell wall. So these lipopolysaccharides, they produce inflammatory reactions. So these are all responsible for the virulence. Flagella, lipopolysaccharides, then the cytotoxins, adhesins, enzymes, and the urease. They are responsible for the virulence of H. pylori. Now, how does it cause damage? So H. pylori actually it moves through the mucus layer. So as it has a urease, it will be converting the acid into it will be neutralizing the acid in its surrounding vicinity. It enters into the mucus layer and it adheres to the cell just adjacent to the intercellular junctions. The site it prefers is intercellular junction. Why? Because it produces the vacuolating cytotoxin gene A protein, so that with the help of that protein it will cause lysis, damage to the cell. So as it adheres near the intercellular junction, first it damages these junctions. So when there is a damage to the junction, the cells are loosened and slowly the H. pylori it tries to enter along the walls of the cell and go into the deeper tissues, into the lamina propria. That's why it first adheres at the intercellular junction. Then, as I told you, the cytotoxin associated gene A protein it alters the signaling pathway. So we have a cytokine protection. So these cytokines actually they produce inflammatory reaction where you have a neutrophil recruitment. So these neutrophils which come here, they go and phagocytose this H. pylori which is trying to enter into the lamina propria. Along with that, the neutrophils they also produce the mediators which will produce inflammatory reaction. So we have even the monocytes and T cells coming there. So all these cells they produce the cytokines and prostaglandins which will further exacerbate the inflammatory reaction. And another important thing is the cells which are affected by the H. pylori, they have decreased mucin production. So slowly what happens, the amount of the mucin produced is reduced. So slowly there will be thinning of this mucosa and the acid will come in direct contact with the epithelial cells which will cause direct damage to the epithelial cells. Now, what is this immunological mechanism? Already I have told you now. So we have the H. pylori which will be producing the SCAG, so that causes alteration in signaling pathway. We have a release of the cytokines by that which will cause neutrophil recruitment, and these neutrophils which come there they phagocytose the H. pylori trying to invade this tissue. Then these neutrophils along with that they also produce reactive oxygen species which will be producing the inflammatory response. So you have exacerbation of the inflammatory response. Along with that, the cells which are infected by the H. pylori actually they activate the T cells. They send the signals to the T cells and the monocytes and they are activated. So when they are activated they produce other mediators like interferon gamma, interleukin 6, prostaglandins, and the reactive oxygen species. So out of all this, interferon gamma and interleukin 6, they stimulate the B cells. So these activated B cells, they start producing the antibodies. Not only that, these mediators, they also cause a direct damage to the tissue, direct damage to epithelial cells, and even they cause more inflammatory reaction, and then you have more inflammatory cells coming there producing all the cytokines causing damage. So the process goes on. So this is the tissue damage via the mediators. First infects the antrum, so we enteral gastritis. Initially we have the enteral gastritis. Later on, as the infection becomes severe, it produces the pangastritis. So as I told you, the development of the pangastritis, it is dependent on several factors, several host factors. Like all the hosts will not have the same expression of the receptors for the adhesins, or all the persons will not have the same production of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. The amount of the pro-inflammatory cytokines produced actually it decides the damage to the mucosa. So if lots of the pro-inflammatory cytokines are produced, then the damage will be more and the patient will go into the pangastritis. But some people will have less expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines, so the infection will be somewhat less. They may develop the pangastritis in the later conditions. Then morphology, when we see H. pylori is more concentrated on the surface of the epithelium or in the lumen, but they never enter into the lamina propria. So we see this, they are concentrated on the surface. So to demonstrate them, we can see them in the hematoxylin and eosin also, but some special stains are there to identify them very easily. That is by using Giemsa, methylene blue, Aeschylean yellow, or Wharton starry silver stains can be used to demonstrate them. So in the areas where we have this H. pylori, actually the inflammatory reaction will be more, and later on we have intestinal metaplasia. But if the intestinal metaplasia occurs, then there we don't see again the H. pylori. Now this is a methylene blue where you are seeing this rod-like curvilinear structures. This is a gland, and these are the epithelial cells which are having the basally placed nuclei. This is the lumen, and these are the curvilinear structures what you are seeing. This is the H. pylori. Now this is the silver stain, Wharton starry silver stain, and this black colored are the H. pylori. This is the H&E stain. So here it's clear these are the epithelial cells, basally placed nuclei, and this is a lumen. So you see H. pylori on the luminal surface of the epithelial cells. Here these are also the H. pylori. So when we see microscopically, we see them on the surface. Then in the lamina propria, we see the neutrophils, we see the lymphocytes, and we see the plasma cells. Along with that, we see the lymphoid aggregates. Sometimes we see even the lymphoid follicles with the germinal centers. So if we leave it long-standing, long-standing gastritis, it undergoes an atrophic change in the mucosa. There will be an atrophic change. Atrophy means there will be loss of the parietal cells and the chief cells. So these cells are actually replaced by goblet cells, which we see in the intestine. So these goblet cells will be producing the mucin. So that change we call it as intestinal metaplasia. Okay, so the parietal cells and the chief cells, what should be present in the gastric pits or the glands will be replaced by the goblet cells, what we see in the intestine. So that we call it as intestinal metaplasia. If the person develops intestinal metaplasia, there is an increased risk of the gastric adenocarcinoma. Okay, these are all the consequences of the H. pylori infection. So we can have pangastritis, severe gastritis, non-atrophic, or you can have an atrophic gastritis. If it is a severe non-atrophic pangastritis, so we have lymphoid aggregates and follicles with the germinal centers, means we have the lymphocytes which are proliferating, so that can lead to the malt lymphoma. Less than 1% of the cases will be developing this. Or there can be completely gastric atrophy, which we see in 5% of the cases. Or if there is an atrophic gastritis with intestinal metaplasia, later on we can have dysplasia and there can be development of the adenocarcinoma. This we see in 1% of the cases. Otherwise, we have the gastritis which produces duodenal ulcer and the gastric ulcers. Peptic ulcers can develop. This we see in 10% of the cases. And usually it causes gastritis, acute or chronic, in 100%. Wherever you have H. pylori, we have the gastritis in 100% of the cases. And when there is an ulcer formation, if it is deep, producing the hemorrhage, long run it produces iron deficiency anemia also. So these are all the consequences. We have atrophic gastritis, non-atrophic gastritis leading to malt lymphoma, atrophic gastritis leading to the adenocarcinoma, you have gastric atrophy, you have duodenal peptic ulcers, gastric peptic ulcers, iron deficiency anemia, and acute or chronic gastritis. So these are all the consequences. Then how we diagnose the H. pylori. So we have the tests, invasive tests, non-invasive tests. Invasive test is we demonstrate the H. pylori in the tissue biopsy, which is taken from the infected area. So we take a biopsy and then we stain it with the special stains and we demonstrate H. pylori directly. Or we can use the tissue for the bacterial culture. Or we can detect by the bacterial DNA detection by the polymerase chain reaction PCR. And another one is rapid biopsy urease test. This I'll explain you next in the next slide. Then we have the non-invasive test where we can detect antibodies, or we can do the urea breath test. This is based on the generation of the ammonia and the carbon dioxide. This also I'll tell you in my next slide. So this was what I was telling. We have a diagnostic test, rapid urease test, where they take a biopsy from the infected part. So that biopsy bit will have the H. pylori. So this biopsy bit is placed in the urea solution. So if the biopsy bit is having H. pylori, it will be producing urease. So that urease will convert urea to ammonia and carbon dioxide. So once the ammonia is produced, there is a change in the pH, and in this solution actually it has a pH sensitive indicator. So once there is an increase in the pH, because of this indicator, the color changes to red. So if we have a red color, that means it's positive. The tissue is positive for H. pylori. If it stays yellow, that means it is negative for the H. pylori because there is no change in the urea solution. This is rapid urease test. And another test, what I tell you, the urea breath test is the patient will be given the urea, he ingests it. Then this urea, if H. pylori is present, it will be converted to ammonia and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is absorbed into the circulation, then it enters into the lungs and it will be exhaled out. So we will be measuring the amount of the carbon dioxide which is exhaled out. If there is no H. pylori, then the urea will be excreted out. We don't have increase in the carbon dioxide in the breath. So this is a urea breath test. So rapid urease test, which is an invasive method because we take a biopsy. Urea breath test is a non-invasive because we don't take tissue from anywhere. We just give him the capsule and then we measure the carbon dioxide in the breath. So these are the diagnostic tests for the H. pylori. So that finishes about the chronic gastritis due to H. pylori. Thank you friends for listening patiently.